living the moment, the long haul numbered camo sold for a competitive price of 91,000 gold. Bearing in mind that is the competitive price. And I've heard rumors about what was paid for the top price 0001 camo, but we're going to get into that and discuss those rumors. But people are asking why, what's this auction all about? Why is this being done? Well, with the help of this dead Italian bloke, I am going to give my take on why this is happening. And we're going to need to jump into this thing and head back to 1896 for the answer, which ironically was the start of the Klondike Gold Rush. You can't make it up. And then once we've done that, we're going to talk about what this dead Italian bloke has to do with Reforged. Hello, Duncan. So let's get into it and take a trip down memory lane to find the answers to why the auction is taking place. So hopefully you're all wondering by now, who is this dead Italian bloke and what did he do in 1896, which was 20 years before the first tank prototype was even constructed, and what has it got to do with a tank video game in 2026? Well, this is Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto, and we'll just summarize his life as just being an all-round intelligent bloke. But he made some observations which have lasted through to today and apply to economics, and that is what we are going to focus on. Well, our friend Vilfredo here, well, he observed in Italy in the 1890s that 80% of the land was owned by just 20% of the population. He also observed that 20% of the pea pods that he was growing in his own garden yielded 80% of his crop. The man counted peas in the interests of science, so fair play to you, Vilfredo. But this gave way to what is now known as the 80-20 rule. And that being that roughly 80% of your output comes from 20% of the input. Now, generally speaking, this can be applied in many different areas. Firstly, there's a general rule that certainly within the United Kingdom, 80% of the income tax generated comes from just 20% of the population. And there's also evidence to show that in winemaking, 20% of a vineyard's grapes is the grape that contributes to 80% of the high end wine and the revenue that is generated for the vineyard. So it is universally applicable. It can also be applied in car manufacturing as well, where 80% of a company's revenue is generated from 20% of their customer base. And that is the bit we are going to look at now. 80% of revenue generated from 20% of the customer base. So let's explore that a little bit more. So let's take that principle back into World of Tanks Blitz, and the harsh reality is that for the vast majority of us, the 80% of the player base, probably those who are unsure as to why the auction is happening, what are the prices, why is the bidding so high, why have they changed it from a price drop auction to a price rise auction, why are camos included and why are credits now being allowed, all of that sort of thing. The bottom line is, I'm afraid, is you and I are not the target audience for wargaming. We are not the priority customer, because a classic application of the 80-20 rule seems to be the focus, and that is focusing in on the 20% of the player base that will generate 80% of the revenue for the game. Now, I'll try and give you an example of that from some of the rumors I've heard about how much was paid for the top camos, but we will come back to the importance of the 80% when we start talking about Reforged. But what is it about the 80-20 that we think is applicable to the auction? Well, let's just take a look at the way the auction has been structured in the first place. Well, firstly, let's take a look at the number of people who are bidding in the auction versus the number of players that are not actually bidding. And you can see even in this auction here for the E100 camo, there were around about 7,000 bidders to start with. And of course, you would say that not everybody was interested in the camo, but of course, that is part of the structure. Immediately trying to weed out people who are not going to part with their cash and contribute towards the 80% of revenue generation. And so that is the first example. And the second example you can see is from the actual structure itself, where this competitive price was given to us, and that being an indication of what it is that you would need to bid in order to put yourself into the top 25% of bidders and therefore guarantee yourself a prize from the auction. Now it is 25%, but you could probably make the assumption that around about 5% of those bidders were on roughly the same price. And so there's a segregation there between the top 20% and the bottom 80%, even within the bidding structure itself. Now, if we take a look at what sort of prices we are talking about, again, this competitive bid of 91,000 gold, about 500 players would have been above that line if the 25% rule is being applied, which means that about 1,500 and a little bit more were below that line. And so a lot of people did pay less than 91,000 for this particular camo. But if you are to believe everything that is going around on the various forums and platforms, and I've not personally seen any of the evidence myself, but there is a suggestion that the bid that was successful in securing camo 0001 was in the region of 2 million gold. That's right, 2 million gold. So if you then try and disseminate that down and work out that within that top 500, if the top individual is paying 2 million gold, let's quickly take a trip into the store and see how much that actually means in terms of cash value. You can see here 103,000 gold would cost £124.99. If we do the math, or in fact get AI to do the math for us, then there is a suggestion that 2 million gold would cost in the region of £2,400. So, if those rumours are to be believed, then at least one player on their own has contributed an equivalent value of £2,400 to the Wargaming bank account. And of course, player number 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on would likely have been in that high bid region as well. So there is a fairly good chance that the top 20% of bidders in the auction for the long haul camo contributed more revenue than the other 80% of bidders that fell below the line. And it's pretty obvious that all of the people that did partake in the auction have clearly contributed more revenue than the remainder of us who did not. So hopefully that has shed some light on the potential reasons for why this auction is happening the way that it is. It's all about maximizing that 80% of revenue from the 20% of people who are either willing to pay it or can afford to pay it. But what does that mean for the remaining 80%? And how does that link into Reforged and our old friend Duncan, who we know has been ceremoniously sacked from the game? Well, let's have a look at that as well. Well, the good news is that for the remaining 80%, sometimes referred to as the trivial many, there are some circumstances where they cannot be ignored and focus has to be switched over to them. And I think this may have occurred with regards to Reforged and Commanders here, because when your 80% becomes so disillusioned and angry with a company that it threatens the very existence of the organization, then you do have to take action and you do have to listen. So maybe that is why we are seeing the changes to Reforged that many of the player base is asking for. But unfortunately, with regards to the auction, I think it is the future construct because it is generating a significant amount of bids and income. irrespective of what the majority of players think about it. There are enough participants generating enough interest for it to be a model that will be carried forward, and I suspect numbered camos will continue as well, as it's a diversification away from simply selling the tanks. So there you have it. That is my take on what is going on with the auction. I hope you found that of interest or even useful. And thank you very much for watching. And of course, don't forget to subscribe if you are enjoying the content. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Do you agree with what I've said or do you disagree?